preparing live stream webinar.
Hello, everyone. This is Deborah Rue, and you're...
Wait.
Okay.
Sorry, not yet.
Okay, it says on my end that it is streaming live on Facebook.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
We're still learning how to do this. So welcome everyone to Human Potential at Work. Today, we are having a very global conversation. We are joined by a very good friend of mine, David Baines. And David Baines has an organization in the UK that is a global organization. He works all over the world, and I'll let him tell you more about it. But David's company is called David Baines Access Inclusion. And welcome to the program, David.
Hi, it's good to see you, Deborah.
Good to see you too. Last time I saw you, we were in Sharjah together at the UAE Utopia event. So
well, yeah, that was a wonderful event. It was a little bit warmer there than it is here in the UK at the moment.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the warm weather over there in the Emirates. It was fun. And I came back to a very cold day in Virginia. So I was like, what's going on? So David, do tell the audience a little bit more about your work. I mean, you've done so many amazing things, but today I know that we're going to talk about disruption, which is a very important topic, but tell the audience a little bit more about what the kind of work you've done.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, most of my work has been around developing services, really looking at new ways of delivering technology, assistive technology to people with disabilities. So I started out actually as a teacher, working in the UK, dealing with children with severe learning difficulties, autism and so on. And eventually we ended up working here in the UK and Europe, and then was asked to go to visit Qatar for 4 days, was the original story. I ended up staying there 6 years. And in Qatar, what became really interesting was how do you deliver a service when you have a blank sheet? When all those assumptions and legacies and vested interests don't exist, how do you deliver assistive technology services? And that was the challenge we had. The lessons from that are what I'm now working on more and more, and particularly I'm interested in areas such as how do we support refugees with a disability?
Right.
How do we support where we need low cost and free supportive technologies in emerging access ecosystems? What can we learn from what's been done in the US and Europe, but actually draw from it rather than try to replicate it?
Right.
And so I've done quite a bit of work over the years in terms of localizing assistive technology, developing training materials. And I'm quite lucky because I'm now in a situation where I can try to support some people in places in Africa, Middle East and Far East, where basically there isn't the funding to make high-level consultancy a possibility. So I'm pretty lucky, really.
So David, most of our audience will have heard of assistive technology, but will you just take a couple of minutes and talk a little bit more about it? Because I think sometimes maybe they've heard of assistive technology, but instead maybe they've heard of a screen reader. So will you just elaborate a little bit on assistive technology?
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about assistive technology and accessible technology. So we have things which are assistive technologies, and these can be things which can range from support for people with a visual impairment, where things are made bigger on the screen, or actually where your phone becomes a magnifying glass, or it can be where text is read out to you, and that can be great for somebody who's blind, but also really helpful for somebody with dyslexia. You know what? It's also really great if you're in the car and an email comes in and you have your email read out to you. So it's a form of accessible technology. And then we've got things that support people with physical needs. We can control our technology using our eyes, using our head. We can just touch it. We can speak to it using voice recognition. All of these are forms of access to technology and technologies that enable access. It's a little bit of both. And what's interesting, I think, at the moment is that balance changing and shifting over time.
I agree. And something else that some people in our audience might not understand is that a lot of the assistive technology that's been created has been created in English. So one thing that I really, really admired that you did in Qatar was when you really tried to help solve the issue of assistive technology not being native in it, not being available in native languages like Arabic.
Yeah, yeah. And we had all sorts of problems. I mean, I don't speak Arabic. And as a result, I really understand for many people working in other languages how difficult the idea of creating something in Arabic might be. But we really tried to develop a framework and a system to provide the support that both companies, but also open source developers needed to support their products into Arabic. And those same models we could now also apply now. We were in Pakistan recently looking at how could we support Urdu speakers,
Right.
and so on and so on. There's a lot of languages. Arabic's the 5th largest language in the world. It's a huge market. So we've got to be able to reach into that market, I think.
I agree. And I know during your speech during the UAE, you mentioned that there are 50 million people with disabilities in our Middle Eastern countries.
Yeah, and one of the big challenges we have is actually quantifying those numbers.
Right.
Validating them. We know that just purely based on demographics of age, gender, and so on, we've got to be talking about these sorts of numbers. But we're dealing with a situation where some of the definitions of disability used vary, the way in which statistics are gathered. But no matter how we look at it, when we talk about countries of the size of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, within the United Arab Emirates, and so on, we're talking about a lot of people. And a lot of people for whom Arabic is a second language, remembering it's the language of the Quran and so on.
Right. And one thing that I always talk about is I think sometimes people don't understand that people are the same all over the world. They want to take care of their families. They want to contribute to society. Are there people making bad, stupid decisions everywhere in the world? Yes. But primarily, the people that I get to meet and deal with in these countries are people that really care about the humanity and the people with disabilities in their countries. I want to move to disruption, but before I do, I want to talk just a couple more minutes because I'm just fascinated with the depth of problems associated with it. And I know that you are becoming a global expert on this. And so can we talk just for a few more minutes before we move to disruption about the refugees,
Yeah.
many that are acquiring disabilities or have disabilities, and they're in this ridiculous, horrible situation. And on top of it, they have disabilities as well.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers of refugees, displaced persons, is growing year on year. We perhaps see more of that as an issue here in Europe than you do in the US at the moment. But the scale of people moving out of Syria, Iraq, and other parts of the region into countries such as Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and across into Europe is huge. Now, the one thing we know when people undergo conflict is that people become disabled, whether it's as a result of a physical disability from the conflict, whether it's to do with things like hearing loss from the conflict, or whether it's to do with emotional and social trauma. All of these things add up. What is interesting, because the scale of the humanitarian crisis is so huge, whilst many, many people talk about supporting people with disabilities, actually in practice, they're finding this extremely difficult. So the area I've been working on substantially is really around education of refugees. Once you move beyond the immediate humanitarian crisis of food, shelter, and so on, you then start to talk about, well, how do you give people an education? Because actually this is a vulnerable population now. And we need to look at their original language, we need to look at their needs. So much of the work we did on Arabic assistive technology and the production of Arabic digital content can now be applied into this setting. So whilst people are learning German or Turkish or English, they're still receiving an education. And because they're fluid, they're transient, they're moving, what we can give them as well is a mobile learning and e-learning framework, which they can take with them as they move from place to place. And ultimately, the project we worked on was called Build Back Better. Most refugees we met talk about going back to their country eventually, however many years that might take. So being able to take their qualification, their skills, their knowledge back to Syria, Iraq, to be part of rebuilding the country. is a really important part of what we're trying to achieve.
And, I'm sure that once again, this is the same all over the world. People love the countries that they're born in, that they live in. And even if they've had to flee because of violence, it doesn't mean that they don't want to go back and really, live in their country and really make a difference in their country again. So
it's really interesting looking at some of the artwork that young people, including those with disabilities, draw about home. And some of that home, yes, it's about the conflict, but it's actually about things that they miss, which is dear to them. So yes, they do want to go back. Now, people with disabilities, whether or not they're in camps or in the urban settings, face extra barriers above and above what every other refugee faces. They have problems of mobility. They have problems of access to information, access to communication. And also, I think many of them are very nervous about declaring their disability in case that means they won't be accepted into the country they're applying for refugee status in. So there's a lot of issues that people like the UNHCR, UNICEF, UNESCO, so on, are trying to grapple with. And part of what we're trying to do is provide some of the tools which will help them in that case, that challenge ahead.
And David, I always am optimistic, but can I be a little optimistic that what we learn from the efforts to truly support these refugees we'll be able to later take and use in other ways to help other parts of humanity?
Absolutely. I mean, we have this huge humanitarian crisis, almost unprecedented in the last 70 years. But the things that we're learning from that experience about people being mobile, about working with multiple languages, working in different cultures, we can draw from that experience and apply it in all sorts of settings, whether that's emergency and disasters, or whether that's simply about large numbers of children being out of school where an education isn't available. We're learning about how we can apply that to children with disabilities who can't get into physical schools. So we've got this real microcosm of need, and by focusing on it, I think you're absolutely right. We can use that to inform much wider work.
Yeah, I'm hopeful about what we're seeing. Something else that I'm seeing, and this is to me part of the disruption, is that I think sometimes society assumes that technology is built for people with disabilities, when actually a lot of the assistive technology and other tools are built by individuals with disabilities or by somebody that loves somebody with a disability, and then it becomes more mainstream. So we're seeing innovation coming from the population of people with disabilities in regards to assistive technology.
Yeah, I mean, I love the work that organizations like TechFugee are doing. Now, they've been brought into this humanitarian issue because it's such a high-profile event. But the things that they're creating will have application beyond that group. So I think we're seeing some of these young people, these young, really very bright, innovative, entrepreneurial young people developing solutions. And here's the thing, because they weren't part of disability and access and the ecosystem, the infrastructure we have, they don't carry any legacy into their designs. Sometimes that means they're just replicating what's theirs before, and sometimes they're just looking at it completely afresh, a horrible phrase, out of the box. But it's just looking at it as a problem and then seeing what solutions they can come up with. And that's exciting.
I think that's very exciting. Can you give us a few examples of that?
I think what we're seeing is some of the things, probably the best known of these are things like AAC applications, so for augmentative alternative communication. We're seeing people present things such as, how do we help somebody with autism communicate? And they talk to people with autism, they find ways of doing it, they look at how language is formed, and they create a solution. They didn't say, everybody has an iPad, or everybody has this, or they don't say everybody has a dedicated device. They came at it new and tried to create something which is quite different for them, also which is innovative. And we're seeing lots of things around these sorts of areas. And the technology shifts because these young people are used to working with certain types of technology. That's what they're using at the moment. Lots of interesting things with wearables, lots of things around home automation and using new technologies there. So I think there's almost in every area of access, we're seeing some forms of innovation taking place.
Which is exciting. And how does all of these things that are happening, how do they tie into mainstream automation? Because I know you and I've had a lot of these conversations, whenever Apple, built voiceover right into, the phones. How is mainstream technology embracing, changing, enhancing, detracting from assistive technology?
I think one of the things that we're in a situation at the moment is we've never been in a scenario where every minute of our lives we see ourselves as being connected right to the web. Now, when we're connected every single minute, there are times when some of the things, the skills that we have aren't available to us. And the classic one is when we're driving. That actually, you can't dial a number with your fingers while you're driving. Not if you want to stay alive for any really great length of time and don't want to go to prison and all those sorts of things. So we have situations where we're situationally disabled. We can't do the things that we're used to doing. Because of that, the big shift that we're seeing happen is people saying, okay, we now have a much bigger population to design for. We actually need to resolve this situational disability issues. Hence, we have voice recognition, Siri or Google Talk or whatever built into our devices. And those technologies have huge implications for people who have no use of those skills. So I'll give you a good example. I've been playing around here at home with Amazon Echo and the Echo Dot. There's the house set up now. And at one level, it's really interesting that it's actually, for me as an individual, I'm thinking, you know what, it was easier. I could just reach up behind me and turn the switch on and off than telling Alexa to switch my lights on. But we have a long corridor which goes from our bedroom to where our bathroom is. And it's pitch black at night. And the ability to use my smartphone or Alexa from the bedroom to say, turn on the landing light, so that I don't trip down and fall down the stairs, is actually really good. So we have these moments where these technologies benefit us. For some people with disability, those moments are whole lives, all the way through the 24 hours a day. Some of us, it's much smaller components. But because the size of the market responds to this, actually we have some really exciting opportunities. The important thing for developers who are doing mainstream is to be aware of the needs of the wider population and how tweaking their system, their design, can actually mean they really reach into that disabled and elderly market, including in the workplace.
And it's fascinating because I recently I had talked about it on Facebook and Twitter, but I recently got a new thermostat, a smart thermostat from Honeywell. And it was funny, and sort of, my husband didn't think it was so funny, but the thermostat we had before, and I won't name the name of the company, but it was terrible. It was terrible. I could not use it. My husband couldn't use it. And every time, and we spent a lot of money on it. My husband bought it. Anyway, we would have to get the manual out every single time we wanted to change it from heating to air, or we even wanted to move the degrees up or down. And it was so frustrating. And so this time we got, I did a lot of research and found that the Honeywell home connected products are much better designed, easier to use, but so it not only has reduced some tension in my household, but I just find it's so much easier to use. And sometimes I think engineers over-engineer to the point where we can't even use your products anymore for the reason why we wanted to use them. But something that they have that I'm so fascinated with, and I'm learning more about it because I want to tell the story. They have an app, sort of like, I think it ties Alexa and all the connected devices. But whenever you put up the panel so that you can use your air conditioning and heating, for example, most people put it up about 5 feet. But if you're in a wheelchair, it's very difficult to use. If you're somebody that's, a little person, there are going to be height problems. Well, they have created an application where you can just do it right from your phone, or you can do it from a device like Alexa or something like that. So it takes away the need to determine where to put the panel because everybody has access to it through their apps. So I just think that I do not have a disability myself, but certainly I'm aging and losing my eyesight and, things like that. But I think things like that are very clever, but I don't see brands marketing as well to the opportunities that applications like that bring to the market of people with disabilities and the older market as well.
And I think one of the things that sometimes we lack is some imagination and creativity with the technology.
Right.
So I was talking to somebody the other day who had been using Amazon Alexa, and a lot of people are talking about using this for people with physical disabilities, where they can use their voice for home environmental control. Great for people who are blind. But we were talking about using it for a young man with autism. And the way it was going to be used was quite interesting. So what the parent had done was to link together a number of the environmental issues that helped her son relax when he became agitated.
Oh.
So what she said, she had light bulbs that were different colors. She had soundtrack on Amazon Music, and she had a couple of other things. And when her son became agitated, she would simply say, Alexa, set for Michael's quiet.
Wow.
Lights would dim. They would turn slightly pink. The music that he likes that relaxes his that comes on. The television would be switched off.
Wow.
Things that agitates him would be switched off. So in one voice command, she was able to link together a number of smart things to shift the environment over to something which was more relaxing for him.
And another point, speaking from a parent's perspective, she was in those situations, things are very stressful. So being able to say this and it happens, that's even bigger than we realize often, because I know sometimes when I'm in a situation with Sarah, and, or Sarah's in a situation with me, everything's really heated up. Yeah. So the ability to be able to just do that, it's going to calm everybody down. And we're going to immediately start to realize that as you make that statement to Alexa, that immediately, I imagine all of our blood pressure immediately starts relaxing because we know. Take
that a stage further, Deborah. Say that Michael, in this case, had like a fitness tracker wearing. And when it recognized that his heartbeat was going above a certain level and he was moving around, he was getting agitated, he was throwing his arms up. What about if that system automatically said, okay, from those sensors, we're going to calm the environment down?
Wow, that's amazing.
And that's perfectly feasible. That's purely about combining data sets and saying we've got the control in one data set, we've got the data coming from Michael. We put those two things together. His behavior we learn from and we shift to something which he prefers in that situation. Now that is
that's amazing. I have found, and I've talked about this on the program, but Sarah, she loves her iPhone. I don't see this happening with her iPad and other devices, but the iPhone, she gets so engaged in the iPhone and sometimes, and I don't know what the right time is, but she'll be using it too long and she'll get so immersed in it that I come in to say, hey, or time to take a break. And, everything becomes very stressful very quickly. And having tools like that to help, and because I've threatened and she does not appreciate to turn her phone off. And we've gotten into some big arguments, and I'm not the only one. And this is not just about disabilities either. All of us are sometimes stressed by our technology. And so think of the application across the board to so many people to be able to use technologies in these ways. I mean, sometimes if my heartbeat's going up, and I'm starting to, I'm starting to get really stressed out, I might not even recognize it at first. It takes a moment or maybe longer to say, okay, because the other day I was getting anxious about something. And the reason why I was getting anxious, David, is because I had been working too long on my computer. I had not taken a break. I am bad about that. My ADHD kicks in and and I finally realized that the anxiety, I could feel it almost moving up my body. And I thought, you've got to stop. And so I did. I stopped and I walked outside. and my dog joined me, and I was petting my dog, and it was like, I don't know, everything, all the anxiety just flew out of my body. It was fascinating to me. And I mean, I'm and over a certain age. And so you would think I would get this better, but sometimes when it comes up on you, it's on you before you even realize that you're in a situation, a stressful.
Yeah, and I think there's some interesting things you can do in that scenario. So one of the other areas that I find quite interesting is people with repetitive strain injury in the workplace, which can develop to become quite a serious disability for people. Now, let's take an example where as somebody's hand wrist is becoming more painful, so they're trying to type on their keyboard, and it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. So these sort of sensors could sort of say 2 or 3 things could happen. So the first thing could be, it says, Deborah, do you think it might be a good time to get a cup of tea?
Right.
Let's notice you're typing wrongly, you're slowing down, and so on. So it's actually the first thing it does, it says, what it's really saying is take a break. But rather than stop working, think, do you think you'd like a cup of tea? And if you don't, and you're getting worse and worse, it could escalate further and actually say, actually, we're going to stop your keyboard working for 15 minutes because it's a sign that you're in pain and you're not recognizing it. Or it could be that increasingly this becomes adaptive, and say that you've got a condition like multiple sclerosis, and as you tire and you type incorrectly, it retunes your keyboard to your new behavior. So actually, rather than catching keys through tremor and so on, actually it slows the keyboard response rate down. So you're less likely to make typing mistakes. And these sort of sensors, this data, and automating and adapting to our environment, whether that's to do with our blood pressure and too much work and not enough sleep, or whether it's to do with a condition that we have, or a challenge physically that we're having, temporarily or permanent. Done well and done imaginatively, we can find ways of addressing those needs without jumping to that confrontation you're talking about that you and Sarah can get into. If your response as a mum, like my kids, would have been, stop doing it now, come downstairs.
Right. Yeah, and then never goes
well. We know that's not how we wanted to present the problem, but we jump, sometimes we just jump to these situations.
Right.
And things escalate really quickly and get out of hand. I think the technology can help us with that.
And as the examples you're using, David, it can help all of us. And certainly it helps individuals with disabilities and people that are aging in place, wanting to age in place. But it helps all of us because, once again, we talk about a lot. We're these human beings that are made of many parts. David, what is your dream for the future? If you got to wave a magic wand, what would the future look like?
There are always 2 answers to that. The first is that I will be spending my lottery win. Without a shadow of a doubt, that is the first one. I think but slightly more seriously, I think the real issue is, how do we use technology to give us greater control over our lives? How do we get it to help us link together our behavior and ease pressure on us? There's that line around assistive technology and dependency. But what I'm really interested in now is, if we could wave that wand, if through our natural behavior we create data through sensors, through the way we live, work, and learn, and that data could shape the environment around us in a way that suits us better. That for me is to do with the dream. And I think when I talk about accessibility, I used to talk a lot about, I think one of the big areas that we're seeing emerging is the idea of transforming data. So if we can take things that are presented in one way and reinterpret into another format, whether or not that's data about us personally, or it's about a document or video, and transform it into another format, which is more accessible to us at that moment, I think then we remove a lot of that pressure and stress out of our lives. And for people with disabilities, I honestly believe increasingly that many aspects of accessibility will be delivered through this transformation of data. That we'll be able to recognize what a picture contains and then speak it out and explain what is in this picture. And we're already getting to that stage now where some things, as Facebook are saying, this is a picture of a giraffe. Now, it may be a cat or a dog, but it's understood it's a four-legged animal.
Right.
Closer and closer to these things. I think also the other areas that I think are going to be really interesting over the next few years is how technology is distributed.
Right.
They're going to be looking increasingly, I think, at the idea where technology designs are distributed rather than the technology itself, rather than the hardware and the software, particularly hardware, I think, where we can get to the stage where we can actually distribute a design globally for people to print and manufacture within their own communities. Those may be something we sell, there may be something we just simply share. But for me, that is really exciting as well, that we could actually get to the stage where a design could reach a very, very large population very quickly. And for me, that is also a really interesting area for the immediate future, is how we can get technologies that people need into their hands more quickly and more cost efficiently.
David, I could talk to you for days and days and days. And one thing I would like to do, and I'm going to ask you one more question, but I would like you to come back on the program, because one thing I think that would be interesting to talk about is talking about this topic, especially from the disruption aspect, from the different disability groups. And I won't get you to answer it now. I'll tease the audience so that we'll have you on again. But things like right now, individuals that are deaf or hard of hearing, often they are left out in large numbers, and because many people don't know how to communicate with them. So I think the promise of technology, when someone is speaking a different language from you, that might be American Sign Language, or maybe it's Arabic, or, the promise of technology, once again, to include us all. So I just admire your work so much, David. I know you're very modest, but the work you're doing is actually changing millions and millions of people's lives all over the world. What you did in Qatar has been picked up and implemented in other parts of the Middle East and all over the world. So I know you will shoo that off, but I'm really, really impressed. So we're definitely going to bring you back, but I have one more question for you.
Sure.
The audience I'm sure they're going to want to know more about David Baines. So tell the audience how they can find you. What's your website? I know you're on social media. They can always come to me and I'll send a link, but tell the audience more about how to find out more about your work and how they could contribute to your work. How they could bring you in to work with them. Tell us more about that.
Well, I suppose you can email me, david@davebainesaccess.org. But the way I've tried to work, and Deborah, I think you probably taught me this, is now what I see us doing is, rather than creating a website that people come to, I've got one, davebainesaccess.org, but actually pushing information out to where people congregate on the internet.
Right.
So you'll find me using that Dave Baines Access thingy on Twitter. You'll find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page and a Facebook group, but you'll also find me on Instagram. You'll find me on Pinterest, where we maintain a whole bunch of boards around different things to do with access technologies. All these different media reach people in different ways. What I think I should be doing, what we should be doing, is saying, where are people using?
Right, I agree.
And we seed and feed those resources. Because that's the change in behavior. People don't just simply go to a website now and spend time. We jump from media source to media source. So if you want to find me, and please do, you try and find me on your preferred social media. And if I'm not there, then do let me know, because I probably should be. we as a community should be.
And Dave, are you part of the Human Potential at Work Facebook page?
Well,
you know what? I'm gonna invite you to be part of it, especially since I want to feature you as a regular guest because of the amazing work you're doing. So I'll send you an invite to that. Everybody's welcome. And we're trying to, like you said, we've got to find out where people are gathered. But I started this Facebook page at the direction of Doug Foresta, my producer. And already we're up to almost 2,500 members. So it's growing very quickly. And we want it to be a place where people can come together and share information and talk about these very important conversations.
Yeah, because these communications, these technologies integrate together. I know we're going to come back and talk about disruption and so on, but this has got implications for things like training, for technical support, for the ways in which we assess needs and provide technology to people. These are all part of this whole shift that's happening. And what's really driving that is people's behavior.
Right.
People do not behave the way they did 10 years ago. Their relationship with the people who manufacture and provide goods and service them is much more direct now than it used to be. And that's what we've got to respond to in making sure we reach that full population who can benefit from assistive and accessible technologies.
I agree. I look forward to continuing the conversation. I know that we are going to feature you again on Access Chat, AXS Chat, talking about this topic. And you and I, we're going to write a blog about it on Huffington Post. So I look forward to having you back on the program, and thank you for letting us include you in Facebook Live too. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye, David.
Bye, Deborah.